The Florida Panthers will be back in their barn for Game 6, and we have everything to prepare for Friday night's game. We talk about the fallout of Game 5, some of the injury updates ahead of Game 6, and we talk about players who get you there and players who get you through, all on today's show.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, April 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And a special shout out to all the everydayers who make not only Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day, but also wanting to get your daily Florida Panthers fix, whether it's the Florida Panthers being behind 3-1 in a series or an attempt to make a comeback. So I want to say thank you, especially to the everydayers. And crazy to think that the expectation of being here, especially if you're a neutral hockey fan who thought that the Florida Panthers, with the point difference of them and the Boston Bruins, a lot of people said Boston in 4 or even 5. But again, like we preached for over a week now, really ever since Game 82, is that the Florida Panthers aren't your typical ace seed opponent. And now we have a Game 6 in Sunrise, Florida, and boy, do the Florida Panthers have a chance to bring this to a 7th game. But it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show where Nick Fairbanks is back here. Nick, welcome back to the show, and I'm glad we are previewing a Game 6 instead of talking about the offseason.
It's almost as if we kind of manifested this to happen. Whether the playoffs just started or, just the overall, just the feeling around this team. Like you said, a lot of Boston people or a lot of the experts are picking Boston at 4 or 5. Well, sorry to bust your brackets, boys, but and girls. But all season we've said that this team has been resilient. They've never given up. And what could you say about last night's performance? They were hemmed in much of the game during the second period and after, and they just wouldn't quit. So I'm not quitting on them. Armando, I know you're not quitting on them. I know none of the fans are going to be quitting on them. But still, they have a tall task ahead of them because they actually have to win one in Florida first.
Yes.
And then they have to go back and win a 3rd game in Boston. So let's get it done. Let's just get the one game down here in Sunrise done, and let's go back up to Boston and put all the pressure on the Bruins.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to ask you about the decision to play Sergei Bobrovsky as well, because listen, I was very unsure, and of course 44-47 on the night. I want to give you your thoughts on how the thought process going into it, and then what happened after, and your thoughts after.
So it was 50-50 in the air for me because I think Lyon looked great. He was making saves, and number one thing for me in playoffs is a goalie that can control his rebounding. Bob showed that he really couldn't do that in Game 4, unfortunately, and then in the little that he played in Game 3. So, but he is the veteran. Maurice went with him because of the experience and that he needs to own it, which you have to wonder if that's ever actually happened to him since he's come to Florida. If somebody's put it up to him saying, hey, listen, you're the veteran here. we brought you here for $10 million a year. It's time to, put the ball in your court and you run with it. So, your leaders and the people that you expect to play big minutes and play in the big time, they have to come through. And Bob certainly did last night. Whether it was a couple saves, routine saves, or basically helping out, with a poke check here and there, because I love that new addition to his game, or simply just making a right pad save with 1 second to go in regulation. So good idea. Good idea by Maurice to put him in.
Still scary to think that Brad Marchand had that chance to get the game winner. But let's go to what Paul Maurice had to say about putting Sergei Bobrovsky in a pressure situation. This was a question asked by Jameson Olive of FloridaPanthers.com. And to think that after listening to that, you think of the leaders needed to step up. Of course, Matthew Tkachuk has been that all series. And then you spoke about parts of Game 3 for Sergei Bobrovsky entering in, and then Game 4 not having a not so great game, and then of course Barkov not playing, not even coming onto the scene just yet. And here we are with an opportunity to force a Game 7, but also, I spoke about it yesterday. You are more known for how you perform in pressure situations, and Paul Maurice put up a challenge. It's like, okay, you're making this much. You've beaten a President's Trophy team before. Now do it again. So that is my takeaway based on what he spoke about of Sergei Bobrovsky after Game 5.
And again, the pressure did need to be there. I happen to think, and this is just my own opinion on this, that previous coaching staffs that dealt with Bob, Quenneville, you just have to wonder if they were afraid to put the pressure on Bob, because I know that in his career in the playoffs, he's not a huge performer. He only started to perform when he was on that last year in Columbus and they swept Tampa Bay. I don't think anybody in Florida's tried to put pressure on him besides himself. And now that they're on the brink of elimination and Maurice comes to you and says, hey, we're rolling with you for Game 6, I think Bob kind of showed the reason why he needs to have faith restored into him, because whether we like it or not, and whether fans want to admit it or not, there's a very good chance that the Panthers don't make the playoffs this year. And Alex Lyon aside, for what he did in the final 7-8 games, mind you, this team would not be in that position if Bob did not play the way he did from January through the All-Star break at all. I mean, that's really when they started making their move and they started closing the gap on everybody. So Bob deserves this moment. He came through, and I really hope he's up to par and he's ready for Game 6.
Yeah, and you're talking about Sergei Bobrovsky and his performance in the playoffs. Really, it wasn't until his last year with the Columbus Blue Jackets that, well, his first year with the Columbus Blue Jackets, he posted a 908 save percentage, but the record was 2-4. So, but again, goalie wins aren't necessarily the end all be all in that, but just exploded on the scene. Of course, that playoff run in 2019, beating the Tampa Bay Lightning. he posted a 925 save percentage, just absolutely incredible in that postseason, in the postseason, not in the regular season, but just not known for being that playoff performer. And of course, we knew how bad he was in the bubble, even in 2021, where he's posted an 841 save percentage as well, and was even taken out for Chris Drieger and Spencer Knight. But this is the opportunity for Sergei Bobrovsky definitely to right all the wrongs previously. And crazy stat: 13-8 in playoff overtimes for Sergei Bobrovsky. The broadcast pointed out 12-8 prior to it, and of course with the win, 13-8. So at least that is on Sergei Bobrovsky's side there.
So what I will say is, because I watch the national feed with ESPN, and unfortunately they are known as the Eastern Sporting Programming Network. So they're definitely going to favor anybody who's close to New England or Connecticut. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the analysts that were on ESPN before they switched over to game coverage, and I mentioned this on Twitter yesterday, is that they said that this game was a formality for Game 5.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thanks for the extra, gas on the fire for us, because Florida stuck in it and now they're coming back down. But I guess the overall point that I'm trying to make is that the national broadcast did themselves no favors, because what they showed for Bobrovsky is that his record in elimination games was like 2-7. Show me another goalie that has like an overall winning record in elimination games. The only one that I can probably think that might even be close to having a positive one are the all-time greats or Andrei Vasilevsky.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I just didn't understand that stat. I mean, going into overtime, they didn't show that stat on the national one. But if you're watching the Florida feed, I'm glad they did, because then I think I would have had more hope then. I didn't expect them to win in overtime last night. So
near did I. Of course, we were waiting for that, for all hell to break loose, that's for sure. But We're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the players that get you there and the players that get you through. An interesting conversation that I want to have with Nick in segment number 2 here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right in the first time around. Just add your vehicle to my garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Let the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Back on this second segment here on this Friday, April 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's another edition of Fairbanks Friday. And I saw you laugh a little bit, and I kind of know why, because if you notice in the ad read, when I say let's ride, I'm impersonating Russell Wilson of the Denver Broncos. So if you hear it like that, it's by design, ladies and gentlemen. But
I think you were better than he was.
Broncos country,
that was great. Ride. Yep, exactly.
Fake persona, Russell Wilson. But let's talk about more of this quote that I heard from the Jeff Marek show today. He of course, every Monday through Friday, he has his show on Sportsnet. I listen to the audio version because, of course, I don't have the channel. And he always brings Elliot Friedman every single day to talk for at least 30 minutes to talk about what's going on in the sport of hockey or in the playoffs that night, and talk about the players who get you there and the players who get you through. And I think about Matthew Tkachuk just about whenever, even when the Panthers weren't winning, we saw the 3-point games, the multi-point games as well. Of course, setting a franchise record for multi-point games in Florida Panthers history. So, but of course, the winning wasn't backing that up, and there were even times where we were questioning: is Matthew Tkachuk's point production is that a big sacrifice to team success? And now we look a little dumb even thinking that. And players who get you there and players who get you through. And listen, again, I'm not saying that the Florida Panthers will win the series, but just about the adversity of being 9 points back and Tkachuk carrying the load. Of course, goaltending had a lot to do with it with Alex Lyon late in the season, and then Sergei Bobrovsky even before he went down with that non-COVID illness. But Matthew Tkachuk fits every part of that bill when it comes to someone who can get you through. I'm not sure if I put Barkov in that category because we have a big enough sample size of what he's done in the postseason. But the Panthers do have that guy who could possibly get you through. And I just think more of Matthew Tkachuk when it comes to a player of that caliber.
That would be probably the best way that you could describe Matthew Tkachuk right now. I think Boston fans would probably highly disagree because he's been called every name in the book since probably, game 3, with that little cross check to the back. But I think the fact is that Florida was able to acquire him for 2 players that were not going to get you through. Now, we've seen it the last couple of seasons where you had Barkov, you had Huberdeau, and you had Weegar. They'll get you to the playoffs, right? They'll have a bunch of great games where they have multi-points and everything, but, were they able to get the team, through the tough times? When there was nobody there, or let's say Barkov goes down, was Huberdeau able to step up? Was Weegar actually, I will say, did step up when the team needed him, because how many times did Aaron Ekblad go down, unfortunately, with a season-ending injury, and Weegar became an elite defenseman? I'm not going to take that away from him. But I think it's more aligned with Huberdeau not stepping up and, I guess, taking over the team like he probably should have. So I think the fact that Florida was able to get a player like Matthew Tkachuk, and he's proving his worth in his first season, not only having a career year, but just the emotional, heartbeat of the team. And now he's actually leading them on the ice and trying to create everything he can, whether he's being a pest, he's trying to set up plays, he's trying to just overall do everything. And he makes it seem look easy, to be honest.
No doubt.
It doesn't look like he's straining himself. He looks like he's built for this, which he might either thank his family, his dad for that, the animosity with his brothers, things like that. So, yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. He's definitely both types of players.
Yeah. And I want to play this clip from Paul Maurice when asked by Katie Engelson about Matthew Tkachuk getting on the board and of course carrying the Panthers to that win on Wednesday night. That smirk towards the end of that clip was when you see Paul Maurice doing this, he's like, it's like we got him. And I kind of felt that way in the summer. I mean, and I had to make sure I had my dates correct too. Paul Maurice was hired on June 22nd. Matthew Tkachuk was traded to the Florida Panthers on July 22nd. Of course, we knew the time of day it was, very late at night, 11 p.m., heading to the next day. But you think about Paul Maurice preparing for his first year with the team, and of course, but remember that Tkachuk wasn't available for a trade until a few weeks after free agency. Of course, the Panthers could have altered some of their plans if he was available earlier, but nothing the Panthers can do about it after they made their small little signings. But also, it goes back to a conversation that we had about Bill Zito. Is like, man, he's saying, man, what I would do to get a player like Tkachuk, and him never even thinking that Matthew would be available, and just and trying to make that happen. And of course, we figured that with the age as well, the age difference between him and Huberdeau as
Mhm.
well, and trying to make that happen. And of course, it can still very well work out for the Calgary Flames too. I mean, they got a first round pick out of it. They got Cole Schwindt out of it. Yeah, he's likely going to be a bottom 6 player when he does arrive in Calgary, Cole Schwindt. But it just goes to show the price that you pay going the other way, you know what you're getting. You're getting a sure thing. You're not taking a guess on someone.
Mhm.
You are seeing a guy's game who is translatable to basically whatever system he's in. Matthew Tkachuk is one of those players. Another player that I think you can put in another system that I think can really work out. The first other name that comes to my mind is Jason Robertson of the Dallas Stars. That's another one that I think his game translates to whichever team you put him in. Artemi Panarin is another one as well. But just Paul Maurice said this dude's a gamer, and how we spoke about him in the offseason and preparation, now it manifested on the ice and him basically carrying the team. It's just brilliant and exciting to continue to have him in South Florida.
Yeah, and Bill Zito, as soon as he found out that Tkachuk was even available, you have to kind of wonder what you want to give up. And I think as soon as Calgary came back and said, "Hey, we're good with the deal surrounding these pieces," give me the green button. Just yeah, let's get this done. Make sure that his or where's my credit card? Give me that. But the big thing about that is not only was it needed for the age difference to prolong this window that the Panthers have to try and win a Stanley Cup, it alters how the team is going to play. Huberdeau was finesse, skill, pass first kind of guy. Tkachuk seems like he's a pass first kind of guy, but he's more of a possession type player. But he plays with grit, and he doesn't allow anybody to, I guess, dictate the game. He's the one that's going to do it for you. And when's the last time Florida had a player like that? You can't really. Like maybe back to maybe early 2000s, maybe with Ole Jokinen, maybe, or even the 96 team. That's probably the only time that this franchise has ever had somebody like that. So to bring in somebody and to see exactly what he's able to do, Maurice is right. He's a, X @ explanation point, hashtag, or, number sign. He's a gamer. And this is exactly what Florida needed. And, one thing I did kind of want to bring up because it actually happened just before we came on, but, we talk about, how Tkachuk has changed this franchise already in his first year. But think about how the marketing of him now here, not only in South Florida, but for the All-Star game and now in the playoffs. Armando, did you know that Game 5 was the most watched playoff game of all time on cable?
Incredible. And even a week ago with Game 1, that was the highest rated game at the time. And, these are only going to go up for the time being. I mean, depending on the route of streaming as well. It's, of course, has to do with Tkachuk being the marketable star that he is, the Bruins and their quest to being the greatest team of all time as well, trying to get a cup, and just so many different factors when it comes to this series.
Definitely. And, with all those storylines, and then you have the drama that's going in, game out. It makes you, it's must see TV. The first round of hockey playoffs is the best out of any sport. NHL playoffs by far is the best of any sport. So see that Florida is a part of something that's very special. It's a really good thing to see. I don't know if they would pull these numbers if they were playing against Tampa, but hey, I won't shy away from the numbers. I think it was like 1.5 million viewers on average last night, and they were peaking at 2.1 million. But that's a lot for the NHL. So I will give credit to Buchagros for putting that out and retweeted it. So,
and of course, it helps with having the number one crew on the call too. That's another thing. Regardless of our opinions of Sean McDonough, regardless. But so
there's one that I don't want particularly, and I'm glad that they've stayed away.
yeah. So yeah. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss more about preparing for Game 6 back in Sunrise, Florida. We're going to discuss some of the injury updates and what the Panthers need to do differently to take home a win and force a Game 7 on Sunday night. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Segment number 3 here on this Friday, April 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back for another edition of the show. And a few injury updates. Maurice clarified that Sasha Barkov was sick heading into Game 1, but started to feel better. Ryan Lomberg will be a game-time decision going into Friday, so chances are the Florida Panthers could have Ryan Lomberg back on that third line. And crazy to think, just I love the social media aspect of what the Panthers have been doing lately, especially getting that video of Tkachuk and saying, "Remember this locker room. We're going to be back here for Game 7," and just the confidence that the Florida Panthers have going into Game 6, even though it's a chance to redeem yourself after what happened in Games 3 and 4. And really, let's just really talk about what the Panthers need to do differently. And also Jeff Marek also preaches more and more that momentum doesn't carry as much into another game as much as we think it does, because we've seen different things go on in this series. And Paul Maurice was asked about whether he was worried about the shot on goal advantage, and talk about how the high shot volume is different in the postseason, not as far as high danger, but that it's chaos created with the shot, and talk about how can't give up 50 shots on goal, whether they're quality or not. But one thing we've seen is momentum doesn't carry as much as we think. But also power play needs to continue, back-to-back games that they score, and the crisp movement, and also positionally too. Mm-hmm. Even though Aaron Ekblad wasn't a part of the power play one, with him being back in the lineup, the having Tkachuk on that right flank, Bennett on the doorstep, and then Rhino in the slot, in the bumper position, mm-hmm. the different things that come to the table there. And even when the puck is dished behind, you could have Tkachuk towards the corner as well. Bennett digs it out, and have Sam Reinhart creep on the doorstep for a backdoor pass. So different dimensions, faster skaters too there as well. Mm-hmm. So that's what I can appreciate about what Paul Maurice has done with the power play. And again, we're not going to pretend that Ekblad is the fastest skater. Does he have a good one-timer shot? Sure. But you need quicker puck movement on the power play. And I think I'm not guaranteeing that the Panthers are going to have some type of explosion. Yeah, they need to fix things on the other end of things, on the penalty kill.
Yeah.
But it's also encouraging to see that, okay, 2 straight games, you even though you gave up 2 power play goals on the other side, 2 out of the 3, which even on the expected goals model, you see 3 goals for the Panthers, 3 goals for the Bruins on 5-on-5, and they only gave up 1 actual goal. So incredible. Mm-hmm. Again, what Sergei Bobrovsky has done. But those are my keys to the game as far as what the Panthers need to do in order to win Game 6. What are your keys? And not only that, but how confident are you in the Panthers coming back home for Game 6?
So I'll start off in saying that I agree with Marek on this. I think us as fans and us in the media per se, we have longer memories because we need storylines to tell, and we want to see like a story being built, or we need to see conflict. And what we see is like Boston and Florida just going at it now that there's game 6. The fact that Florida's been able to stay resilient and stay in the series when nobody gave them a chance, whereas the players in all sports basically, they're trained to come in, play their game, talk about it, and then forget it, whether it was a good game or a bad game. Because what'll happen is if you keep remembering or focusing on things that you may have done or didn't do in the previous game, it could affect your play now, and it could affect a series. And that's just the mentality you have to have going into the playoffs, and especially in this series. So Marek, 100% agree. Secondly, with how Maurice was talking about shots and chaos and everything, I agree to an extent. But the problem with that is that I feel like Boston's done a much better job in keeping Florida on the outside, putting shots on, and
Correct.
limiting the amount of chances, whereas Florida has really not done that. I mean, I think the only game that they've actually done that was game 2, where Boston was just giving us pizzas all day. I mean, Little Caesars couldn't even give us free pizzas like they were. So it just goes to show you that Boston, I think, is all bought in, and they have all the players to do it. Because look, game 5, they benched a 17-goal scorer and some players that were actually making an impact or making it hard on the Panthers, and they put Bergeron in. Bergeron didn't make an impact. Let's not dismiss him or anything like that. But did you see him down on the boards trying to win battles a lot? No, he played the bumper position. He won faceoffs, a big faceoff actually on that power play. So kind of wondering, what Boston's going to do for game 6, and I'll kind of get into what I'm going to think here in just a second about game 6 and how I feel. But you had mentioned how Florida has scored 2 power play goals in the last 2 games. And yes, there was a change. Ekblad's off. You said that, his skating ability is slow. That's been his curse, unfortunately, since he's been drafted. But the problem with that, too, is that whenever he gets the puck or he needs to go down low to win a puck battle, he's not winning them. He's not keeping the puck in the zone. So what do? I think the right decision was to put Barkov on the top because, I might say something controversial here, so I don't know. But Barkov is a better defender than Ekblad. So in case there is something that goes wrong or Barkov has to be the last man back, I think I would trust him more than having Ekblad back. So there's a rhyme or reason for that. And then on the PK side, you know how you fix that? Stop taking dumb penalties.
Especially that too many men on the ice.
Jesus, like that by far was inexcusable. How were there 6 skaters on the middle of the ice? Like that was just so bad. I was silent when that was called. I'm like, how?
I was like this.
Yeah. It was awful. But then Ekblad takes back-to-back penalties. You cannot give a team like Boston that many chances because Panthers are winning 5-on-5, whether they were getting their heads crushed in on the possession and everything. They were not allowing goals 5-on-5. Now, if you give Boston those chances, of course they're going to tie it up and we're going to be back on our heels. So going into what I think game 6 is going to be, Boston's controlled both games. Florida's come out really good for the first 10 minutes of the first period. They have nothing to show for it. Every team that has scored first wins the game.
Mm-hmm.
Florida needs to find a way to score within the first 10 minutes of their push to really cement them being in that game. Because if they don't, Boston's going to score 1. Florida's going to feel like, okay, we just put all that effort and we didn't score, and they just threw it on net. It's in. And then you go into the second period down 1, and then they get a power play and they're already up 2-0. Then you're starting to scramble a little bit. You got to start changing your identity, how you're playing the game, and you're basically running around. You have chaos then. So my thing, stop taking dumb penalties and get the first goal in the first 10 minutes because they're going to come out and they're going to push. After that, play your 5-on-5 and play to the point that you're standing Boston up on the blue line. Don't let them just cross over the blue line with the puck. Let them dump it in and make them work for it because if you wear them down, they're not going to be able to play in the third period in the final minutes when you're trying to put pressure on.
And basically, if you allow the first goal, there's an opportunity, especially when you're in an elimination game, you could be running with a chicken without a head. And
yes.
So that's what
trying to do too much.
Panthers, you don't want that's a position you don't want the Florida Panthers to be in. And listen, if the Boston Bruins score first, I'm not. The trend has shown first one to score wins, and it's been that trend in each of the first 5 games. So hopefully, come Friday night, we see the Florida Panthers being that first team on the board, and of course, forcing that Game 7, which I will be there in South Florida for Game 6. Chances are, maybe or maybe not, we'll be doing an intermission meetup in the middle of the game. So anyone who follows me and the show page on the Locked On Florida Panthers Twitter and on Instagram, be sure to follow for any announcements on any intermission meetup. So we can shoot the breeze a little bit and what our thoughts are throughout the game. So Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Armando, thank you again for having me. It's been a roller coaster all season, and especially with this series. Everybody who's listening, you guys can follow me at Prudentious0. Very colorful on Twitter during the game. So if you guys like some funny tweets, or you guys just want to get like an in-second emotion on what's going on, I'm the guy to follow. But let's win Game 6. Let's take care of business at home, and let's take it back to Boston, where all the pressure is going to be on them, and we have a legit chance at ruining the best overall regular season for the Boston Bruins. So, Armando, thank you again.
Absolutely, and I hope to see you next week, where we're talking about, hopefully, a round 2. So
against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yes, that'll be awesome. That'll be great. By the way, before we sign off, who are the Bears picking? Because the draft hasn't happened yet.
I'm going to probably say that they're going to probably go with an offensive lineman. I don't know exactly who, but that's something that they need to protect Fields with. And they already have wide receivers for him. So the next logical thing, get an offensive lineman that's going to be with you for years to come.
Yep. And of course, we're recording this right before the draft and right before the games start on Thursday night. So we'll know all those results by the time you guys listen to in the morning. So Nick, thank you so much. And I will see you next week, my friend.
Thank you. See you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Ronan, and Locked On NHL Prospects. And for the everydayers, make sure to come back to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on Saturday morning, where we'll be breaking down Game 6. Will we be talking about the Panthers being eliminated, or will we be talking about the Florida Panthers forcing Game 7? So hopefully we are talking about the latter. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.